For many, migrating to the U.S. represents a chance at a better life and a brighter future. And in the face of tightening visa norms, it is the introduction of the all-new EB5 Visa Program that has meant a turn of fortune for so many. So, to help us break down some of the finer nuances of the EB5, including insights on who qualifies, fortunately we're joined by a panel of subject matter experts in studio. Allow me to please introduce them. The CEO and founder of EB5 BRICS, Vivek Tandon. The Director of Client Relations at EB5 BRICS, Jahanvi Narula. Partner of Fakuri Global Immigration, Rohit Tarkhad. Now, the EB5, to my understanding, is a visa program via which eligible immigrant investors can gain permanent lawful residence in the United States, not just for themselves, but for their immediate family members as well. The claims are certainly tall. What are the terms and conditions here?
So there are three basic requirements for EB5. Requirement number one is an investor must invest either $900,000 or $1.8 million in specifically what they call targeted employment areas or non-targeted employment areas, because that's what determines whether they get to invest $900,000 or $1.8 million.
Sure.
So that's requirement number one. Requirement number two is you must invest that money into either a new business or a new development project. Whether you invest in a business, whether you invest in a project, the business or the project must create 10 full-time jobs for U.S. workers. And if you meet those three requirements, then you should be able to get an EB5 visa, which is the equivalent of a U.S. green card.
Is there a time horizon within which all these three requirements must be met so that one becomes one step closer towards securing their EB5?
It takes about 2 to 3 years to get the approval on the application and takes about 4 to 5 years to get the conditional green card. To get to the permanent residency would be another 2 to 2.5 years. So this is the time frame that we are looking at.
Well, Rohit, I pose my next question to you, which is what sets the EB5 Investor Visa Program apart from the more traditional existing methods of securing permanent lawful residency in the United States?
That's a very good question, and certainly the subject of many debates at the present time, because you've heard of many global organizations coming in to pitch their country's program. Clearly, the US is still the strongest magnet in the world. The firm that I'm with, we represent, as the name suggests, we're global immigration. So we do represent clients all across the world. We're about a firm of 140 people, and we actually represent most of the large IT companies out of India in their efforts to help their qualified employees go to the US either on non-immigrant visas or migrate eventually. Now, one of the reasons why the EB5 is clearly the best option is the traditional methods of getting a green card, which would have been through an employer, such as when I went many decades ago. I went there as a student, and then I was sponsored by an employer and got my green card in about 3 to 4 years. That has changed, and not just changed, it's changed the landscape completely. It's well over 30 years to get a green card. EB5 is still, along what Janvi just said, is taking about 3 to 5 years to get what's called the conditional green card. So 3 to 5 years versus 30 years, I think the advantages are pretty obvious.
Vivek, so Rohit has so beautifully outlined some of the advantages of the EB5, but I'd like for you to shed more light on the complexities. And in such a scenario, what can one expect from an EB5 expert, whether it be in the form of a broker, a lawyer, an investment advisor, so on and so forth?
Sure. So EB5 has two aspects to it. There's the immigration aspect and there's the investment aspect. And you'd be well advised to engage professionals on both sides. So I'm a US investment banker and a lawyer. So I focus on the investment side of EB5. It's generally my role to tell people where to invest and where not to invest. Because we're obviously not talking about a small amount of money, we're talking about almost $1 million.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the capital that you need to put at risk to get this EB5 green card. The capital at risk must create those 10 full-time jobs in the US economy. So you want to make sure that you make a viable investment that's going to end up creating 10 full-time jobs so that you actually qualify for EB5. And that's where people can actually do their own homework. Make sure the person you're dealing with is licensed with FINRA, SEC. These are the regulatory agencies in the US, just like you have SEBI in India.
Sure.
You can check people's licensing status, how long have they been active, whether they have any disciplinary actions, things of that nature. Same on the legal side. For the immigration piece, they need to make sure that their source of funds is clean, clear, and convincing. And for that, you have to engage an immigration lawyer who's experienced in EB-5, who knows source of funds, especially documenting source of funds for Indian nationals.
Well, Jahanvi, I'm very curious to understand what are the investment vehicles and asset classes via which one can secure their EB-5?
For EB5, there are two kinds of investments. You can either make a direct investment or you could opt for the more popular option, that is the regional center EB5. Under a regional center, the client is not responsible for job creation on his own, so this seems to be a more feasible option.
Just to come back to one of the basic requirements, in the EB5 investment must be at risk, and it's actually kept at risk for a relatively long period of time. Somewhere about 7 to 8 years possibly. So it's important for the investor to recognize that, which also makes it more important to select the right team, because that team is going to be with you, whether it's the investment advisor, whether it's the broker, whether it's the attorney, going to be with you for quite some time to come. So you need to have that rapport, you need to have that trust. And I think it's important for the investor to recognize that this is an investment for your green card. So your return is actually the green card, not a return on your investment. And I think, as Vivek pointed out very early in our conversation, you've got to recognize that somebody has to help you and give you the right advice to make sure that there's a return off your investment at the end of 7 or 8 years.
Now, what's so interesting about the EB5, Rohit, is that while it's been in existence for quite some time, it's only gained momentum in the very recent, I'd say, a year or two, 18 months to 24 months. Why so, and do you expect it to gain traction going forward?
When I started doing this about 5 years ago, there were less than 50 applications going out of India. Last count in about 2018, there were well over 1,000 applications that went out of India. Simple reason again, the traditional methods of migrating to the US are taking well over 3 decades. If you look at parents who are sending their kids to study abroad, and the kids who want to stay there for a better opportunity, for better future, better possibilities, whatever it may be, are not really willing to wait for 30 years to get a green card. India certainly tracks the record for becoming one of the wealthier countries in the world. There are probably more millionaires now in India than ever before, which allows many families to support and to encourage their children's dreams of migrating to the US. And they'd rather do it sooner than later. And I think that's a pretty well disposed of parental responsibility to say, listen, I'm going to give you $1 million when I die. I might as well give it to you now and get your migration to the US sooner. So clearly the traditional methods are kind of an incentive to actually doing the EB5.
Well, Jahanvi, in your view, how are Indian investors in particular responding to the EB5? And are there certain investment vehicles, investment paradigms that they're gravitating more closely towards?
So India has been one of the most popular EB5-centric countries. As Mr. Rohit said, that there used to be only 100 applications versus back in 2018, it was a number of 1,000. But now, with the investment amount that has changed very recently from 500 to 900 has led to a slowdown, but still Indians are very keen in opting for the program. So it seems that the attraction is very much there. A lot of people would generally think that an EB5 investment is a growth investment versus the biggest return is a green card on this investment.
The last 5 years I've spent mostly half the year in India and then half the year in the US, only because the clients are here, but the project that they invest in is over there, and we do a huge amount of due diligence to make sure that it's a viable investment for EB5 purposes.
It's almost impossible if you've invested in a project, let's say, that's been suggested, I'm not saying recommended because it's always the investor's decision, that you're going to get a denial based on a problem with the project or the regional center. But you can certainly be subject to getting a denial because your source of funds doesn't clear the immigration scrutiny.
So Vivek, say someone wants to take the first step and apply for their EB5. How do they vet and verify the credentials of a so-called EB5 expert?
Sure, so it's all about due diligence. When it comes to EB5, whether it's the people that you're working with or whether it's the project you're investing in, what you want to do is, perhaps, go onto Google, and see what they've, which company do they work for, what are their credentials in terms of their education, their experience, and then, like I said, go onto the FINRA website, go onto the State Bar website, and see how long they've held their licenses and whether they have any disciplinary actions or not. And once that is clear, and once you've done your own due diligence, then reach out to people, contact them, and there's no substitute for an in-person meeting. That's the reason I literally come to India every month. But in the last 5 years, I've spent mostly half the year in India and then half the year in the U.S. Only because the clients are here, but the projects that they invest in is over there, and we do a huge amount of due diligence to make sure that it's a viable investment for EB5 purposes. So due diligence is the key. That's where you start, and then generally once you meet with the professionals, you should have all the information at your disposal before you make that fully informed decision about whether you want to move forward with an EB5, who you want to move forward with in terms of your EB5 investment, and where do you want to end up investing.
And if you've established your credibility, then your name comes up more often than it does not.
Right.
So I think that's a very good starting point when you're doing your due diligence as well.
And Janvi, I'd like to debunk some of the most common myths that are surrounding the EB5. So what are some of the most common questions that clients come to you with, and how do you essentially clarify those questions for them?
So a lot of people would generally think that an EB5 investment is a growth investment versus the biggest return is a green card on this investment. The other myths that are associated with EB5 is that you get your green cards in 2 years' time versus it's a long cycle. Indians are taking about 8 to 9 years to get to the final green card. So it's important to engage with the right people to get the doubts cleared.
In terms of the timelines, they always vary because it's up to the USCIS in terms of what kind of workloads they have, how long they're taking to process these applications. But generally speaking, an Indian applicant should be looking at about 3 to 4 years. Those are the published processing times right now for an I-526 application to get approved. That's the application you file based on the investment you've made. So if it takes 3 to 4 years to get the I-526 application approved, there might be an additional wait for the visa to become available. Currently, there is a visa backlog for India-born applicants, but that backlog should clear up in the next 4 to 5 years. So all in all, a conditional green card is about 4 to 5 years away, not 2 years like some people like to propagate in the market, and that's just unfortunately not the case anymore. That used to be the case if you had applied maybe say 4 or 5 years ago. And then at this point in time, by the time you get your unconditional green card, which basically starts, once you get your conditional green card. So the conditional green card that you get is valid for 2 years initially. At the end of those 2 years, so say 7 years from now, you file for what they call removal of conditions. And while that removal of condition application is pending, your conditional green card gets automatically extended. So it's about a 7-year cycle before you get the unconditional green card. There is no difference as such between the conditional green card and the unconditional green card. It's the same rights, privileges, and benefits. And that's, sort of the beginning till the end of the EB5 cycle. And in terms of return of capital, it should happen at the 7 to 8 year mark as well.
Following up on the timelines that Vivek and Janvi talked about, your monies are going to be tied for about 7 years or so, 7 to 8 years. And it's a myth also sometimes for people to come in and say, oh, it's guaranteed by the US government. No, it's not. A regional center is a simple economic entity or corporation that's in it to do business, that it's in the EB5 space to raise money for their projects and to make money for themselves.
Well, in your professional capacities, all three of you encounter multiple EB5 applicants on a daily basis. What, in your view, gives an applicant an edge?
So I'll start. I think the biggest thing is, where did the money come from, which is what they call source of funds. As I said, the U.S. government is very particular about what kind of monies are being used to fund an EB5 investment. And that's exactly what, somebody like Rohit focuses on is, the origin of the money, how was it earned, how was it grown, how was it saved, things of that nature. So if you have, clean, clear, convincing source of funds, then you should not have any issues getting an approval. But of course, on the investment side, the project that you're investing in needs to get approved by the U.S. government as well. And that's again where the due diligence piece comes in. So in terms of due diligence, you want to make sure that you're dealing with an experienced regional center. Regional centers are these, like Rohit said, an economic entity that acts as an intermediary between EB-5 investors that want a green card and generally a developer that is looking for money to build something.
Sure.
So these regional centers usually should have a track record of performance in the industry. How long have they been there? How many EB-5 projects do they have under their belt? How many conditional green cards have they delivered? How many permanent green cards have they delivered? How much money have they returned? So for example, right now we're funding 3 projects, an infrastructure development project in Texas, a commercial tower project in Bronx, New York, and then a residential project in DC. Now, all 3 of these regional centers are highly experienced, highly successful in the EB5 industry. I mean, of course, past performance doesn't guarantee future outcomes, but at least it's an indication of, who you're investing with. So, you have to make sure that, these guys know what they're doing, that they've delivered in the past. And of course, you've got to look at the merits of the current project. And that's where our role really comes in. We want to make sure that these guys are going to be able to accomplish what they say they're going to be able to accomplish, because not only is your money at stake, your green card status is at stake as well.
Sure.
Right. So as long as the investor is well educated and is getting the education from the right people, I think that's where he has an edge. You should be fully informed about who you're investing with, who you're engaging. It's important to have experienced people helping you execute the EB5 process for you.
And Rohit, what kind of success rate have you yourself, experienced in the industry when it comes to the EB5 Investor Visa Program?
I'm very conservative and very selective. I don't simply accept a client unless I'm really comfortable with their source of funds, which Vivek referred to earlier, because that's literally the linchpin for the success of the investment and your immigration application. So I don't take a case simply because somebody's willing to pay the legal fees, because it's a long process. It takes 4 to 5 years. I want to make sure that at the end of 4 to 5 years and through the entire process, I have a happy client.
Again, just piggybacking on what Rohit said, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're pursuing an EB5 because you really want to be in the U.S. or you want to create an option for your children. If you have questionable source of funds, make sure you thoroughly vet, where that money is coming from. And I'm not suggesting that the money is not through legitimate means. It's just that not everybody is able to track and trace and properly document, monies that were earned, say, 10, 15, or 20 years ago.
Sure.
Because, the thing that you want at the end of the day is, the green card. And if your source of funds is not in proper format, then you're going to have issues getting an approval. Then it defeats the purpose of doing an EB5. Because again, if you come to somebody like Rohit in 4 or 5 years and say, I'm being issued a denial because my source of funds was not clear, then the onus is on me to make sure that they're able to get their monies back right away as well, instead of having it tied up for the next 7 or 8 years.
Source of funds is the single most important thing. Once you've gotten advice or choices presented to you by somebody like Vivek, who says, okay, these are the 3 credible regional centers I'm working with. Now you're going to deal with the source of funds. It's very rare if you've invested, I'm going to say it's almost impossible, if you've invested in a project, let's say that's been suggested, and I'm not saying recommended because it's always the investor's decision, suggested by somebody like Vivek that you're going to get a denial based on a problem with the project or the regional center. But you can certainly be subject to getting a denial because your source of funds doesn't clear the immigration scrutiny. So that's a big one.
By way of closing comments, for the benefit of our viewers who may be watching, who are interested in taking the first step towards applying for their EB5 and securing permanent residency in the U.S., what would your words of advice be?
Get educated. Ask questions. As I've always tell every client, it's your money, it's your investment, it's your risk. Ask all the questions you want to. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Talk to your friends, get a sense of what's going on. Start with the universal executive assistant called Google and start from there, take it from there and talk to people. It's
important, like Mr. Tarkhad just mentioned, that it's important to know everything before you make this investment. So that's it, that's all you need. You need to be educated to be making this investment.
Vivek?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, we're a due diligence firm. So not only should you be doing your own due diligence, ask me as many questions as you like, because if you don't ask me questions, that actually gives me doubt about whether you're really serious about doing an EB5 or not, or whether your source of funds is going to be in line. So do your homework, do your due diligence, ask questions, meet people, talk to people, and then make a fully informed decision.
Well, that brings our special feature on the all-new Investor Visa Program, the EB5, to a close. I trust you've all found it of value. Thanks for watching.